She thought she had one. When my wife smiled and admitted she was in love with another man, my own daughter stood beside her and said, "Mom deserves to be happy. You're the problem." I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I quietly signed the divorce papers, packed one suitcase, and walked away without looking back. They laughed as I left. They thought they had taken everything: my marriage, my family, my dignity, and soon my fortune. But they had no idea that 3 months before the divorce, I had secretly rewritten my entire will. Every dollar, every property, every company share, gone. Not a single penny would ever reach the woman who betrayed me, or the daughter who chose greed over her own father. Then came the day my ex-wife marched into the attorney's office, expecting to claim the inheritance she'd already been spending in her imagination. Instead, the attorney slowly opened the envelope, looked her straight in the eyes, and said, "Do you have any idea whose name is on this will now?" The smile disappeared from her face. My daughter turned pale, and in the next 60 seconds, their perfect victory became the most devastating karma either of them had ever imagined. Stay until the end, because this true-style karma betrayal story proves that sometimes the loudest revenge isn't anger. It's walking away in silence and letting karma finish the job. For 27 years, I believed I had built the kind of life people envied. My name is Daniel Carter, and at 58, I thought I understood the meaning of loyalty. I had spent nearly 3 decades building Carter Industrial Solutions from a tiny repair shop into a company worth tens of millions of dollars. Every late night, every missed vacation, every sacrifice had one purpose: to give my family a future I never had. My wife, Rebecca, never had to worry about bills. She drove a luxury SUV, belonged to the city's most exclusive country club, and traveled wherever she wanted. Every birthday, anniversary, and holiday, I made sure she felt appreciated. Our daughter, Emily, was 25 years old. She had graduated from one of the best universities in the country without a single student loan because I had paid every tuition bill. When she wanted to start her own interior design business, I invested nearly $500,000 without asking for a single share in return. I wasn't a perfect husband. I wasn't a perfect father. But I believed I had always been present when it truly mattered. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. It all began on a quiet Thursday evening. I arrived home earlier than usual, carrying a small velvet box in my pocket. Inside was a custom-made diamond necklace Rebecca had admired months earlier while we were shopping downtown. She had no idea I had secretly ordered it. Our 20th wedding anniversary was only 3 days away, and I wanted to surprise her. As I parked in the driveway, I noticed something unusual. Rebecca's silver Mercedes wasn't there. That wasn't strange. But another car was. A sleek black Porsche I'd never seen before sat directly in front of the garage. I frowned. Maybe one of Emily's clients, I thought. Without giving it much attention, I grabbed the gift box and quietly unlocked the front door. The house was unusually silent. No television. No music. Only faint voices coming from upstairs. I smiled. Maybe Rebecca was talking to Emily. I wanted to surprise them both. Slowly, I walked toward the staircase. Halfway up, I heard laughter. Not ordinary laughter. The kind of laughter people share when they believe no one else is listening. Then I heard a man's voice. Soft. Confident. Comfortable. My footsteps froze. Rebecca laughed again. "I swear," she said between giggles, "Daniel is so predictable. He probably still thinks I'm attending book club every Thursday." The man chuckled. "I almost feel sorry for him," Rebecca answered without hesitation. "Don't. He's spent his whole life working. I spent mine pretending." My heart stopped. The velvet gift box slipped from my hand and landed softly on the carpet. I couldn't breathe. For several seconds, I stood there unable to move. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe there was another explanation. I forced myself to climb the remaining stairs. The bedroom door was slightly open. just enough to see inside. And what I saw shattered 27 years of marriage in a single heartbeat. Rebecca stood beside the window, kissing another man. Not a quick mistake. Not an accident. A long, passionate, comfortable kiss that could only belong to people who had done it many times before. The man wrapped his arms around her waist as though he belonged there. Rebecca smiled the same smile she used to save for me. Except, now it belonged to someone else. The world around me disappeared. Every anniversary. Why? Every Christmas. Every promise we'd ever made. Every sacrifice. Every memory. Gone. I pushed the bedroom door open. Neither of them looked surprised. Rebecca slowly turned toward me. There wasn't a trace of guilt on her face. No panic. No fear. No apology. Only a calm expression. As though she'd been expecting this moment for a very long time. The man stepped back but remained silent. Rebecca folded her arms. Well, she said casually. I guess now you know. I stared at her, unable to speak. Finally, I managed one question. Who is he? She glanced at the man and smiled. This is Victor. The man I actually love. The words hit harder than any physical blow ever could. 27 years. Reduced to one sentence. Before I could respond, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Emily walked into the room. For one brief second, relief washed over me. Thank God. My daughter would put an end to this nightmare. She looked from her mother to Victor, then to me. Instead of shock, she sighed. Dad, I'm glad you finally found out. My stomach dropped. You knew? Emily nodded slowly. For almost a year. The room began spinning. You knew your mother was having an affair. And you never told me? She crossed her arms. You wouldn't have understood. I stared at the daughter I had loved with every part of my soul. What is there to understand? Emily took a deep breath. Mom deserves happiness. You've been emotionally absent for years. You cared more about your company than your family. And honestly, she looked me directly in the eyes. I don't blame her. Those words hurt even more than the affair itself. Not because they were true, but because they came from my own daughter. Rebecca walked over and gently held Victor's hand. We're tired of pretending. I want a divorce. There it was. No hesitation. No tears. No attempt to save our marriage. Just a decision that had clearly been made long before I ever walked through that front door. I looked around the room one last time. At the woman I'd loved for nearly 3 decades. At the daughter I'd spent my life protecting. At the stranger standing comfortably in my bedroom. 3 people. Not one of them looked ashamed. In that moment, something inside me quietly broke. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. Instead, I bent down, picked up the small velvet box from the hallway floor, slipped it back into my pocket, turned around, and silently walked out of the room. Behind me, I heard laughter. They thought I was walking away defeated. None of them realized that the quiet man leaving that house had already begun planning a future where betrayal would carry a price far greater than they could ever imagine. The drive away from the house was the longest of my life. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't have a plan. For the first time in nearly 30 years, I had nowhere I wanted to be. The diamond necklace still sat in my pocket. Every few minutes, my hand brushed against the velvet box, reminding me that only an hour earlier, I had been thinking about anniversary dinners and vacation plans. Now, my marriage was over. I pulled into a quiet park overlooking the river and turned off the engine. The silence was deafening. Then my phone buzzed. Rebecca. I stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. A second later, another message appeared. We need to discuss the divorce like adults. Another followed almost immediately. Please don't make this difficult. I laughed for the first time that day. Not because anything was funny. Because the woman who had just destroyed 27 years of marriage was asking me not to make things difficult. I put the phone away without replying. That night, I checked into a small executive hotel downtown. The receptionist recognized me immediately. "Mr. Carter, should I reserve your usual penthouse?" I shook my head. "No. A standard room will be fine." She looked confused. Everyone in the city knew Daniel Carter. I owned one of the largest manufacturing companies in the state. Money had never been an issue. But that night, luxury meant nothing. I just wanted a room where nobody knew my story. The following morning, I arrived at Carter Industrial Solutions before sunrise. For 27 years, this building had been my second home. My executive assistant, Linda, looked up in surprise. "You look exhausted." "I am." She hesitated before asking, "Everything okay at home?" I forced a smile. "It won't be." Before she could ask another question, I walked straight into my office and locked the door. I looked around the room. Every award, every framed newspaper article, every photograph of company milestones. Rebecca had stood beside me in nearly all of them. I quietly removed every family photo from my desk and placed them inside a drawer. Then I pressed the intercom. "Linda." "Yes, Mr. Carter?" "Please schedule appointments with my divorce attorney, my estate attorney, and my financial advisor." She paused. "I'm sorry. Did you say divorce attorney?" "Yes. As soon as possible." By noon, I sat across from my longtime divorce lawyer, Richard Hayes. He had represented me for over 20 years in business matters. He studied my face for several seconds before speaking. "I never thought I'd see you in this office for this reason." "Neither did I." I briefly explained everything. Rebecca, Victor, Emily, the affair, the betrayal. Richard didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he slowly removed his glasses. "I'm sorry, Daniel. Now let's protect you." He opened a legal pad. "Do you want to fight the divorce?" "No." "Do you want mediation?" "No." "Do you want reconciliation?" I looked him directly in the eyes. "No. I want peace." Richard nodded. "Then we'll give her exactly what she asked for." 3 days later, Rebecca invited me to meet at a luxury restaurant to discuss the settlement. Victor was already sitting beside her when I arrived. He smiled as though he'd won some kind of competition. Emily joined them a few minutes later. No one apologized. No one looked uncomfortable. Rebecca folded her hands confidently. "I'm glad you came." I sat down calmly. "So am I." She smiled. "I think we can keep this civil." "I agree." Victor leaned back in his chair. "That's mature." I ignored him completely. Rebecca slid several documents across the table. My attorney prepared an initial proposal. I glanced at the papers. She wanted the family mansion, 2 vacation homes, half the investment portfolio, lifetime spousal support, several luxury vehicles, and a significant ownership stake in Carter Industrial Solutions. She hadn't asked for fairness. She had asked for everything. I closed the folder. "Finished?" Rebecca smiled. "That's only the beginning." Emily finally spoke. "Dad, you've always said family comes first. This is your chance to prove it." I looked at my daughter for a long moment. Family? That word sounded strange coming from someone who had helped hide an affair for an entire year. Still, I remained calm. "I'll let the attorneys handle everything." Rebecca looked disappointed. "No argument? No. No shouting? No. No accusations?" I stood from my chair. "You've already made your choice. Now I'll make mine." Without another word, I walked toward the exit. As I reached the door, I heard Victor laugh. "I told you. He's too weak to fight." Rebecca laughed with him. Emily smiled. None of them realized they had mistaken silence for surrender. Later that evening, Richard called me. I've reviewed every financial document. There are several legal options available. I stared out the window of my hotel room. Then I quietly asked the question that would change everything. Richard, if someone completely betrays the family, can I legally decide who inherits my estate? There was a long silence. Finally, Richard answered. Daniel, that's exactly what a will is for. For the first time since discovering the affair, a calm expression crossed my face. Because while Rebecca was busy calculating what she believed she would receive after the divorce, she had forgotten one very important detail. Nothing in life is guaranteed, especially an inheritance that hasn't been written yet. The next morning, I walked into the office of my estate attorney with a level of calm I hadn't felt in weeks. His name was Michael Reynolds, and for nearly 20 years he had handled every trust, investment, and legal document connected to my business. The moment I entered, he stood and shook my hand. Daniel, Richard called. I'm sorry you're going through this. I nodded. Let's get started. Michael opened my estate file. This is your current will. He turned the thick binder toward me. It was the same document I had signed 6 years earlier. Everything was divided exactly as Rebecca and I had planned. If I died, Rebecca would inherit almost everything. Emily would inherit the rest. The company would remain under family control. It was the will of a man who believed his family loved him. Michael looked at me carefully. Do you want to update a few details? Or create an entirely new estate plan? I didn't hesitate. A completely new one. He raised an eyebrow. Are you certain? Absolutely. He slowly closed the old file. Then let's begin. For the next 2 hours, we reviewed every asset I owned. The family mansion. 3 vacation properties. The company headquarters. Manufacturing plants. Investment accounts. Commercial real estate. Luxury vehicles. Art collections. Retirement funds. Stock portfolios. Every dollar I had earned over 30 years appeared on the screen. Michael finally asked the question he had been avoiding. Who do you want as your primary beneficiary? I looked out the window for a long moment. Then I quietly answered. Not Rebecca. He nodded and made a note. And Emily? That question hurt even more. My daughter. The little girl who used to wait by the front door every evening just to hug me when I came home from work. The little girl who used to call me her hero. Where had she gone? Or had I simply refused to see who she had become? I closed my eyes. Then answered. Remove her too. Michael stopped writing. I want to make sure you're thinking clearly. I am. This decision can't be based on temporary anger. It's not. It's based on trust. And trust is gone. The room fell silent. Finally, Michael nodded. Very well. Instead of leaving everything to Rebecca and Emily, I made a decision no one would ever expect. 30% of my estate would establish scholarships for children whose parents couldn't afford college. Another 20% would fund a foundation providing vocational training for military veterans. Several long-time employees who had remained loyal through decades of hard work would each receive substantial financial gifts. Linda, my executive assistant. Frank, the factory manager who had worked beside me for 24 years. Maria, the receptionist who still remembered every employee's birthday. People who had stood beside me because they respected me, not because they expected money. Finally, Michael looked at the last empty line. There is still a significant portion remaining. Who receives it? I smiled for the first time since my marriage ended. My younger brother. Michael looked surprised. David? Yes. You haven't mentioned him in years. I know. David Carter lived a simple life in Montana. He owned a small cat ranch. He had never asked me for money. Never expected favors. Never cared how successful I became. The last thing he had said to me during our annual fishing trip echoed in my mind. Money tells you who loves your wallet, Hardship tells you who loves you. At the time, I thought he was being overly dramatic. Now, I understood exactly what he meant. 3 weeks later, the divorce proceedings officially began. Rebecca arrived at court wearing an expensive designer suit. Victor sat confidently beside her. Emily smiled politely as though this were just another business meeting. Their attorney carried himself with the confidence of someone expecting a very profitable outcome. Richard leaned toward me. "They seem unusually relaxed," I whispered back. "They think they've already won." The hearing lasted less than an hour. There were discussions about temporary property arrangements, financial disclosures, future mediation dates. Nothing dramatic. As we exited the courtroom, Rebecca caught up with me. "I've been meaning to ask you something." I stopped walking. "What?" She smiled. "You've been surprisingly cooperative. I expected more resistance." I shrugged. "Why?" She laughed softly. "Because eventually, everything you own ends up with Emily anyway." Victor grinned. "And Emily loves her mother." Rebecca slipped her arm through Victor's. "So one way or another, your wealth stays with us." Emily didn't say a word, but she smiled. That smile told me everything. They weren't just planning the divorce. They had already planned my death. Not literally, but financially. They expected to enjoy everything I had spent 30 years building. I simply looked at all three of them, then calmly said, "You should never count money that doesn't belong to you." Rebecca frowned. "What does that mean?" I smiled politely. "You'll understand someday." Then I turned and walked away. Behind me, Victor laughed. "He's bluffing." Rebecca nodded confidently. "He'll come around." Emily agreed. "They always do." None of them knew that only 48 hours earlier, the old will had been permanently destroyed, and a brand new one, bearing my signature, was now locked inside Michael Reynolds' office safe. The first move in the game of karma had already been made. The divorce dragged on for nearly 4 months. Rebecca enjoyed every minute of it. She continued living in the mansion while Victor practically moved in without anyone saying it aloud. Luxury vacations filled her social media. Expensive restaurants. Weekend yacht trips. Designer shopping bags. Every photo carried the same message. She had already erased me from her life. Emily appeared in almost every picture. Laughing. Smiling. Calling Victor family. Each new post felt like another knife twisting in my chest. One evening, Linda walked into my office holding her tablet. "Mr. Carter. You probably shouldn't see this." I looked up. "What is it?" She hesitated before placing the tablet on my desk. Rebecca had uploaded another photo. She and Victor stood on the balcony of a luxury resort, champagne glasses raised. The caption read, "Sometimes you have to leave the past behind to find your true happiness." Thousands of people had liked it. Many of our mutual friends commented, "You deserve this. So happy you found real love. Congratulations on your new beginning." No one knew she had started that new beginning while she was still married. I quietly handed the tablet back. "They're free to celebrate." Linda frowned. "Doesn't it make you angry?" I looked out the window. Anger is expensive. I've already paid enough. A week later, Richard called. "I've got something you need to hear." An hour later, we sat inside his office. He slid several photographs across the desk. Victor leaving an upscale restaurant. Rebecca beside him. Holding hands. Kissing. The date printed on the corner froze my attention. It was nearly 18 months before I had discovered the affair. Richard folded his hands. "A private investigator confirmed everything. It wasn't a recent mistake. It was a long-term relationship." I stared silently at the photographs. Every business trip I had taken. Every anniversary Rebecca claimed she was visiting friends. Every late-night charity event. Every girls' weekend. They had all been lies. Richard spoke carefully. There's something else. He pushed forward a folder filled with bank statements. Large amounts of money had quietly disappeared from our joint accounts over the previous 2 years. Luxury jewelry, international travel, 5-star hotels, designer boutiques. Nearly $480,000. Spent without my knowledge. Most of it benefiting Victor. I slowly closed the folder. I trusted her with everything. Richard nodded. I know. That evening I drove to the old neighborhood where Emily had grown up. The small park was still there. The swing set where I had pushed her every Sunday. The basketball court where I taught her to shoot. The ice cream shop where she always ordered mint chocolate chip. I sat alone on a bench until sunset. For the first time, I wondered where I had gone wrong. Had I worked too much? Probably. Had I missed birthdays because of business meetings? A few. Had I always believed providing financially was enough? Maybe. But none of those mistakes justified betrayal. None of them explained why my own daughter had hidden another man's presence in our home for over a year. My phone rang. Emily. I answered. Dad? Her voice sounded strangely soft. Can we talk? I remained silent. She continued. Mom thinks this divorce is getting ugly. I almost laughed. Ugly? It became ugly the day you decided. Lying was easier than telling your father the truth. There was a long pause. Dad, you don't understand. No. I understand perfectly. You chose your mother. I chose honesty. She sighed. Victor isn't a bad person. Those words hit harder than anything else. I looked toward the empty playground. Emily, when you were 6 years old, you asked me if superheroes were real. You remember what I told you? No. I said heroes are ordinary people who choose to do the right thing when it's difficult. Another silence. Then I quietly continued. You had hundreds of chances to tell me the truth. You chose silence. You watched another man walk into my home. And you protected him. Emily's breathing became heavier. I didn't want anyone to get hurt. I closed my eyes. But someone did. And it wasn't the people you protected. Without another word, I ended the call. The following morning, something unexpected happened. Michael Reynolds phoned me. Daniel, I need you to come to my office. Is something wrong? No. But someone was here yesterday asking unusual questions. Who? He hesitated. Rebecca. My grip tightened around the phone. What did she want? She asked whether your estate documents had been updated. A cold smile slowly crossed my face. So, they're already worried. Michael nodded. I told her absolutely nothing. Everything remains completely confidential. I thanked him and hung up. For the first time since the divorce began, I realized something important. Rebecca wasn't just fighting for a divorce settlement anymore. She was trying to protect the fortune she believed would eventually become hers. She had no idea. That fortune had slipped through her fingers months ago. And the day she discovered the truth would be the day karma finally came knocking. 6 months passed. The divorce was finalized. Rebecca walked out of the courthouse smiling. She received a generous settlement, the luxury SUV, and the family mansion until it could be sold. To everyone watching, she looked like the winner. Victor hugged her in front of the courthouse steps. Photographers captured the moment. Emily stood beside them, smiling as if they had just celebrated a wedding instead of destroying a family. I simply got into my car and drove away. For the first time in years, I felt free. Life slowly settled into a quiet routine. I bought a modest lakefront home 2 hours outside the city. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't surrounded by servants or expensive cars. But every morning, I could drink coffee while watching the sunrise over the water. There were no arguments. No lies. No pretending. Just peace. Linda often joked during phone calls. I've never heard you sound this relaxed. She was right. For the first time in decades, I was living instead of merely working. I even visited my younger brother David in Montana. We spent an entire weekend fishing, talking, and laughing like we had as boys. One evening, sitting beside a campfire, David looked at me and smiled. You know, I haven't seen this version of you in 30 years. What version? The one who smiles without forcing it. I stared into the fire. I forgot what peace felt like. David placed another log on the flames. Sometimes God removes people from your life because they were removing the life from you. Those words stayed with me long after I returned home. 3 months later, everything changed. It started with a sharp pain in my chest during a board meeting. I ignored it. An hour later, I nearly collapsed while walking to my office. Linda rushed me to the hospital. After several hours of tests, the cardiologist entered my room carrying a thick folder. His expression told me the news wasn't good. Mr. Carter, you've been under severe stress for a very long time. He pointed to several scan results. Your heart has suffered significant damage. We can manage it with treatment, but I strongly recommend retirement. I nodded quietly. How much time do I have? The doctor looked surprised. We're not talking about weeks. But you must change your lifestyle immediately. No more 16-hour workdays. No more constant pressure. No more living for everyone except yourself. As strange as it sounded, his words didn't frighten me. They clarified everything. For 30 years I had spent my life building wealth. Now, I wanted to spend whatever time remained actually living. The following week, I called a meeting with the company's board of directors. Every executive filled the conference room. Some had worked beside me for over 20 years. I stood at the front of the room. I've made a decision. I'm stepping down as CEO. The room fell silent. Several people looked shocked. One director immediately asked, "Who will replace you?" I smiled. The board already knows the answer. Everyone turned toward Linda. Her eyes widened. Me? I nodded. You've been running this company beside me for 15 years. You know every department. Every employee trusts you. And unlike many people, you've remained loyal when loyalty wasn't profitable. Tears filled Linda's eyes. I don't know what to say. Just take care of the people who helped build this company. I will. News of my retirement spread quickly. Less than 24 hours later, my phone rang. Rebecca. For the first time since the divorce. I answered. Hello? Her voice sounded unusually concerned. Daniel. I just heard about your retirement. Are you okay? I'm fine. You don't sound fine. I am. There was an awkward silence. Then she carefully asked. Someone mentioned you've been in the hospital. I smiled to myself. News. Traveled fast. I'm taking things slower. She hesitated before asking the question she truly wanted answered. Is it serious? I answered honestly. My doctor says life is unpredictable. Another long silence followed. Then she quietly said, I'm sorry to hear that. She hung up a minute later. It wasn't until later that evening that I understood why she had called. A mutual friend phoned me. You won't believe what Rebecca asked me today. What? She wanted to know if your health was bad enough. That she should expect an inheritance soon. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. After everything. After 27 years of marriage. She wasn't worried about my life. She was calculating my death. I thanked my friend and ended the call. Then I drove straight to Michael Reynolds' office. He looked up as I entered. Daniel? I need one more addition to my will. He smiled knowingly. I thought you might. I sat down across from him. If anyone contests my wishes after I'm gone, I want every legal protection possible. Michael nodded. It can be done. As he prepared the paperwork, I looked out the window. Rebecca still believed she was waiting for a fortune. Victor probably imagined spending it. Emily likely assumed everything would eventually become hers. None of them knew that the greatest surprise of their lives had already been signed, witnessed, sealed, and locked away. All that remained was the day the envelope would finally be opened. 2 years passed. My health stabilized. The doctors were right. I slowed down, traveled more, spent weekends fishing with David, and enjoyed quiet mornings by the lake. For the first time in decades, I was truly living. Ironically, the happier I became, the more frustrated Rebecca seemed. Mutual friends occasionally mentioned that her relationship with Victor wasn't as perfect as it looked online. The expensive vacations had stopped. Arguments had become frequent. Victor had grown used to a lifestyle he hadn't earned. He expected luxury. Rebecca expected admiration. Neither was willing to sacrifice. The cracks were beginning to show. One rainy afternoon, my phone rang. It was Emily. I hadn't spoken to her in almost 8 months. "Hi, Dad?" Her voice sounded nervous. "What do you need?" The question caught her off guard. I was just checking on you." I remained silent. Finally, she admitted. "Mom said you've been traveling a lot." "That's right. She also heard you're spending time with Uncle David." "Yes." Another pause. Then came the real reason for the call. "Have you changed anything?" I frowned. "Changed what?" "Your estate." There it was. Not. "How are you?" Not. "I miss you." Not. "Can we rebuild our relationship?" She wanted to know about my money. I answered calmly. "Emily, if the first question your father hears after 8 months is about his will, then the conversation is already over." She tried to explain. "No, Dad, that's not what I meant." "It is exactly what you meant." I ended the call. As I placed the phone on the table, I felt no anger. Only disappointment. A few weeks later, I invited my brother David to the lake house. As the sun set over the water, we sat on the dock with fishing rods in our hands. David finally asked the question he'd been holding back. "Do you ever miss them?" I thought carefully. I miss the people I believed they were. But those people never really existed. David nodded. "Do you regret changing the will?" I smiled. Not for a second. He looked at me curiously. "Why?" "Because inheritance isn't a reward for sharing my last name. It's a reward for loyalty." Months later, Michael Reynolds requested one final meeting. He handed me a sealed envelope. "This contains your finalized estate documents. They've been reviewed, witnessed, and secured. No one can challenge them easily." I carefully looked at the envelope. "So that's it?" Michael smiled. "That's it." I stood and shook his hand. "If anything ever happens to me, I want one promise." "What is it?" "When the family comes expecting millions, don't tell them anything beforehand." Michael chuckled. "I've been practicing that speech for years." 5 years later, at the age of 63, I passed away peacefully in my sleep at my lake house. There was no pain, no fear. Just a quiet end to a life filled with both love and betrayal. News spread quickly across the city. Business leaders praised my achievements. Employees cried openly. Hundreds attended my funeral. Linda delivered a heartfelt eulogy. David stood quietly beside my casket. Rebecca arrived wearing black designer sunglasses. Victor walked beside her. Emily followed close behind. To anyone watching, they looked like a grieving family. But David noticed something else. Every few minutes, Rebecca whispered something to Victor. Victor smiled. Emily kept checking her phone. They weren't discussing memories. They were discussing what came next. 3 days later, they walked confidently into Michael Reynolds' law office for the official reading of my will. Rebecca wore an expensive black dress. Victor sat with one leg crossed, looking completely relaxed. Emily carried a notebook. They all believed this meeting would make them wealthy beyond imagination. Michael entered the room carrying a thick sealed folder. He sat down. removed his glasses, looked at each of them one by one, then quietly said, "Before I begin, I want everyone to understand that Mr. Daniel Carter personally reviewed every word of this document." Rebecca smiled confidently. "We understand." Michael broke the seal, opened the will, and began to read. Within the first 60 seconds, Rebecca's confident smile began to fade. Victor slowly leaned forward. Emily's face turned completely white, because the first sentence they heard was one they never imagined possible. "To my former wife, Rebecca Carter, I leave nothing." The room fell silent. Rebecca blinked twice, convinced she had misheard. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" Michael Reynolds looked down at the document before calmly repeating the line. "To my former wife, Rebecca Carter, I leave nothing." Victor sat upright. "There has to be some mistake." Michael didn't react. "There is no mistake." Rebecca forced a nervous laugh. "Daniel would have never done that. We were married for almost 30 years. Michael looked directly at her. "Which is precisely why he updated his estate plan after your divorce." The color drained from her face. Michael continued reading. "To my daughter, Emily Carter." Emily finally smiled. She leaned forward, expecting the sentence she'd imagined for years. Instead, Michael continued, "I leave nothing." Emily's notebook slipped from her hands and hit the floor. "No. No, that's impossible." Michael calmly turned another page. "Mr. Carter included a personal letter explaining his decision." Rebecca immediately interrupted. "I want to contest this." "You can certainly try," Michael replied. "But Mr. Carter anticipated that." He opened another section of the file. "The will was reviewed multiple times, witnessed by independent parties, supported by medical evaluations confirming his mental capacity, and reinforced by a no-contest clause." Victor frowned. "What's a no-contest clause?" Michael answered without emotion. "It means anyone who challenges the will without legal grounds risks paying significant legal costs, and still receives nothing." Victor slowly leaned back into his chair. For the first time, he looked worried. Michael unfolded a handwritten letter. The following message was written personally by Mr. Daniel Carter. The room became completely quiet. He began reading. "Rebecca, 27 years ago, I promised to spend my life protecting you. I kept my promise. You broke yours. I could forgive an unhappy marriage. I could forgive honesty. But I could never reward betrayal. You didn't lose this inheritance because you left me. You lost it because you chose deception over dignity." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. For the first time. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of realization. She had gambled everything. And lost. Michael turned to another page. "This next section is addressed to Emily." Emily couldn't even look up. Michael continued. "Emily, the day you were born was the happiest day of my life. I believed nothing could ever come between a father and his daughter. I was wrong. You didn't betray me by loving your mother. You betrayed me by helping her lie. Eve. Day you remained silent. You made a choice. And every choice has consequences. I hope one day you understand that loyalty cannot be inherited. It must be earned." Emily covered her face. Tears streamed through her fingers. "Dad." She whispered the word to someone who was no longer there to hear it. Michael continued reading the financial distributions. 30% of the estate funded scholarships. 20% established the Carter Veterans Foundation. Millions of dollars were distributed among longtime employees. Linda received enough money to retire comfortably. Frank received ownership of the manufacturing plant he had managed for 24 years. Maria received a trust for her grandchildren's education. Each name reflected someone who had remained loyal without expecting anything in return. Finally, Michael reached the last page. The remainder of the estate, including controlling ownership of Carter Industrial Solutions, is left to David Carter. Rebecca stared in disbelief. "His brother?" Michael nodded. Yes. Just then, the office door opened. David quietly walked inside. He hadn't planned to attend the reading, but Michael had asked him to arrive afterward. Rebecca immediately stood. David, you have to help us. This isn't what Daniel wanted. David looked at her for several seconds, then calmly replied, No. This is exactly what my brother wanted. Emily walked toward him, crying, Uncle David, please. I made mistakes. I know. But it's too late. She collapsed into a chair. I never thought he'd cut me out. David sighed. Neither did he. He never thought his daughter would cut him out of her heart. Those words struck harder than anything else that morning. Even Victor had nothing left to say. For years, he had imagined spending Daniel Carter's fortune. Now he realized he had built his future on money that was never his. Rebecca slowly removed her wedding ring, the one she had kept in a jewelry box even after the divorce, believing it still symbolized a claim to Daniel's legacy. She stared at it for a long moment, then quietly placed it on Michael's desk. It was the first time she truly understood. She hadn't just lost an inheritance. She had lost the only man who had ever loved her without conditions. And no amount of money could ever buy that back. 3 months after the reading of the will, everything Rebecca had built with Victor began to collapse. Without Daniel's fortune waiting at the end of the road, Victor's attitude changed almost overnight. The expensive dinners stopped. The luxury vacations disappeared. The gifts became arguments. One evening, Rebecca walked into the living room carrying a stack of unpaid bills. Victor, we need to cut back. Victor barely looked up from his phone. I didn't sign up to struggle. Rebecca stared at him. What does that mean? It means you. Our ex-husband was the one with the money. And now he's gone. I thought we'd have financial security. Rebecca felt her heart sink. For the first time, she realized Victor had never loved her. He had loved the life she promised. A week later, Rebecca came home early. Victor's closet was empty. His expensive watches, gone. His designer suits, gone. Even the framed photographs of the two of them had disappeared. Only one envelope remained on the kitchen counter. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It read, I wanted a future, not a financial disaster. Take care of yourself. Victor. Rebecca slowly slid to the kitchen floor. The man for whom she had destroyed her marriage had abandoned her the moment the money disappeared. The betrayal she had once given had finally returned to her. Karma had collected its debt. Emily wasn't doing any better. News of the will spread quietly through the city. Former family friends stopped inviting her to social gatherings. People whispered behind her back. That's the daughter who hid the affair. She lost everything. Clients began canceling contracts with her interior design business. Not because of Daniel's money, but because trust had become her reputation. One afternoon, she walked into an old coffee shop where she used to meet her father. She sat in the exact chair where he had once helped her study for college exams. The waitress recognized her. I remember your dad. He always ordered hot coffee. And chocolate cake. Emily smiled through tears. He loved this place. The waitress nodded. He talked about you every single time he came. Emily looked down. What did he say? The waitress smiled sadly. He always said, my daughter can accomplish anything she dreams of. Emily covered her face and began to cry. For years, she had believed her father was simply a wealthy man. Only after losing him did she realize he had been her greatest supporter. Money could never replace that. Several months later, David visited the Carter Veterans Foundation. Hundreds of veterans were receiving free job training. Across the street, a new scholarship center welcomed students from families who could never have afforded college. On the entrance wall hung a bronze plaque. It read, The Daniel Carter Legacy. Success is measured not by what you leave your family, but by the lives you improve through kindness, integrity, and loyalty. David smiled. This is exactly what you wanted, brother. That same afternoon, Rebecca quietly visited Daniel's grave. For the first time, there were no reporters, no luxury clothes, no expensive jewelry. Just a lonely woman carrying a single white rose. She knelt before the headstone. I finally understand. I'm sorry. I should have chosen honesty. I should have chosen us. The wind gently moved through the trees. But there was no answer. Some apologies come too late. She placed the rose on the grave and walked away in silence. Months later, Emily also came alone. She carried something much smaller. An old baseball glove. The same glove her father had bought when she was 8 years old. She gently placed it beside the headstone. I kept this all these years. I should have held on to you instead. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I hope, wherever you are, you know I finally understand. She stayed until sunset, not asking for forgiveness, simply wishing she had valued loyalty before it was gone. Years later, Daniel Carter's story became well known throughout the city. Not because he was wealthy, not because he built a successful company, but because he proved one unforgettable truth. Betrayal may win for a season. Greed may celebrate for a moment. Lies may seem powerful. But in the end, karma always collects what betrayal owes. The end.